If this series hasn't been your first time hearing me talk about Log Horizon, then you're probably aware that the specific set of reveals which take place over the course of its second sort of mini-arc are what made me such a diehard fan of the show in the first place. Over time, I've revisited this scene, including with others, and realized that it's not as obvious of a wow moment as I've made it out to be over the years. I'm obviously going to talk about it again in this video, but this time I'm going to go into a lot more detail about why the basic concepts presented in this scene were so exciting for me that it's one of the few scenes in which the show was legitimately more powerful on my initial viewing just because I didn't expect the series to have such cool ideas. Before I get into that, however, I'd like to dissect for a moment what it is that makes Log Horizon so easy to watch, and especially to marathon for the people who get invested in it right away. Much in the same way that Hunter x Hunter or Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood can be torn through in a couple of afternoons despite their significant lengths, it simultaneously feels like a ton of shit is going on in each episode while also feeling like the episodes are over before you even realize it. It's easy for me to see how certain viewers would disengage with the series if they were mostly interested in seeing the plot move forward, and why there are certain arcs that those viewers really tend to fixate on as the ones that made the show good. But if you've bought into the intrigue of this MMO world wholesale, then it's like you're constantly being bombarded with world building details and suggestions of what's possible, and juggling the threads of what's going on in multiple cities and guilds, and also making sure you understand which type of game this is exactly from the picture painted by its mechanics, and it's just a lot to take in all at once. Oftentimes the show will open with a short explanation or clarification of a mechanic which is important to understand for the story going forward, but which couldn't necessarily be addressed in the dialogue itself just yet. After the OP, we will sometimes watch the aftermath of the previous episode's action before the title card, whereupon the episode starts in earnest. Along the way, it sidetracks itself for jokes, character moments, world-building tidbits, and action. Lengthy conversational scenes see changes of subject and are used to set up multiple threads of what the story is going to deal with going forward. Visual cutaways are often used to cram even more detail into our understanding of what's being discussed. And then, even though only one thing really happened that progressed the plot in a linear way, the episode is already over. But in certain episodes, when that one thing which progresses the plot is predicated on the world building which has been going on in the background the entire time, we get the scenes that everyone remembers the show for. The thing is, we can't get to those moments without all the stuff that sets them up. And even if you're watching the show a second time and already know what's going to happen, you'll probably realize that there was even more going on from the start than what you could pick up on in one go. Log Horizon's first semi-big come happens early into episode 5. The lead-in is obvious, but the payoff is highly experientially satisfying, what with the hilarious and really quite inventive animation of the characters eating good food for the first time since the apocalypse. It's the rhythm of Akatsuki's chomping which makes the scene so memorable for me, honestly, but obviously the show's been building to this payoff the entire time by beating us over the head with reminders of how bad food in the game was. I'm sure some people predicted this given how often it was brought up, though I'm also sure others had just taken it as a weird running gag. Personally, I had already gotten upset over the thought by the time it was brought up twice, and was really hoping they'd do something with it after they discussed it in episode 3. And when they started building up to it, I was really excited, so the payoff was that much sweeter. After an explanation of how real cooking works in the game and Shiroi stowing away the creative spark it gives him for later, the subject changes in the conversation. The episode undergoes the same roller coaster of topical and stylistic bouncing I described earlier. It feels lifelike in this regard. In the same way that you and some friends might spend the afternoon bouncing between lengthy conversations about what's going on in your life, your opinions on recent news events or pop culture highlights, the rumor mill of your friend circle, and intense philosophical debate, followed by playing fighting games or drinking games or going out to lunch together or walking down the boardwalk or whatever the hell might happen in a day that you didn't spend hunched over your desk, the show can likewise spin a yarn of everything that might be relevant to the human lives of a huge cast of characters whom it shifts focus between at will. Eventually, Shiroi starts reminiscing about the twins, Toru and Minami, you know, the ones he mentioned were logged in back in episode 1, and explains that shortly before the apocalypse he had been helping them out using something called the mentoring system. One of the best things about MMORPGs is how they can foster an intense feeling of community, even if one of the worst is that this also leads some to be highly exclusionary, though usually you only see that at higher levels of play. When people are dedicating so much of their time and energy to a game that they've all also taken to just hanging out inside of it because it's full of much more fulfilling social connections than they have offline, and have met enough other players to understand how to talk to them, it wouldn't be hard for experienced players to strike up easy friendships, or at least some sensation of kinship with other players when they're aware of the other person's needs within the realm of the game. When I was 13, I played my first MMO in the form of Ragnarok Online. Minutes into the game, when I wasn't sure where to go, a higher leveled player standing around in the town I happened to start in taught me where I needed to go and gave me some helpful starting items just for the sake of helping a new player out. Likewise, my old friends who played MMOs would often party with new players when they got bored, or try to help their friends to get into the game by starting new characters with them. It's cool that Elder Tale has an entire system built for this, and shows that Mamare Tono is aware of some of the innovations which have been made in MMO mechanics over the years. It's a uniquely powerful story beat for Shiroi as well, when you really think about it. This guy only helped out this pair of kids because he was sitting around bored in this video game anyways, and they seemed to be having fun and like they'd sincerely appreciate his assistance, so he decided to help them out for a little while. It's a situation any seasoned gamer could imagine themselves having been in, and yet now that Shiroi has been taken to a new world in which his exceptional knowledge and power has imbued him with the ability to make serious changes in the world around him, and in which he is suddenly an influential adult in a world where these kids can easily fall victim to the cruel schemes of other adults, Shiroi is suddenly being struck with a sense of personal responsibility towards these children's well-being. But really what sells this whole character arc so perfectly is the fact that Shiroi didn't do anything about it immediately. Because he's so locked into his own mind and apt to analyze the situation to the extreme before making any executive decisions, he ends up letting the kids fall into the wrong hands, making whatever assumption about their well-being will comfortably allow him to continue pursuing a better grasp of his situation before getting mixed up in others' business. When he realizes that he was wrong in his assumption, and that he is the kind of person who recognizes when he should probably reach out to someone but avoids it anyways for the sake of remaining focused on his own pursuits, he is humbled and immediately seeks to do something about it. We come to understand Shiroi's initial reaction though as we perceive what he's trying to tackle on a macro level. Right from the beginning, Shiroi has regularly expressed annoyance at the way that everyone else is reacting to the apocalypse, and has reached the conclusion that the reason people are acting so shitty is that no one has anything to do, no sense of purpose. As soon as he finds out that this is a world in which you can hone certain skills in order to craft high quality goods, and in which there are in fact goods which people care deeply about, he knows it's possible to build a trade economy in this world, and for everyone to find purpose. In the long run, this will allow them to save the kids, but we're still a couple episodes off from my favorite scene, so we'll leave that aside for now. After the eye catch begins the sort of literary micro-arc that only hardcore fans are likely to even pick up on. Here Nyanta prods Shiroi about whether or not he's been alone all this time and hasn't joined a guild. Shiroi's voice becomes shaky and he immediately deflects the question to ask Nyanta about his guild instead, which leads us to a comedic scene of Nyanta explaining the cat food guild. The conversation never returns to Shiroi's guild history. His evasiveness worked, though Nyanta knows his tactics well enough to see through it. Eventually, he will give Shiroi the personal push that he needs to create his own guild, and to undergo something akin to a coming of age over the next arc, but it's all basically in the background. The rest of the episode dives into a completely different setup for an arc that's even farther off, by establishing the fact that the people of the land are in this world indistinguishable from real-life humans. This is hugely imperative to know, and is worth having a revelation over, since it's a question anyone would want answered, and from this point forward it will be taken for granted by the main characters that the people of the land are deserving of all the respect and consideration you'd give to anyone else. We will most likely come to this conclusion ourselves, as the dialogue cheekily railroads emotional beats and exposition about the NPCs' lives as hard as it can into a few minutes of casual greetings. But it's right after Shiroi shares in our revelation that he expands on it. Not only are the NPCs human, but they are closer to the humanity which the adventurers have left behind than the immortal and nigh-impervious gods which they've become. The people of the land are basically just a set of Middle Ages societies in a world that operates on video game logic. Over the course course of its run, Log Horizon will extrapolate on the people of the land as a metaphor for non-first world nations, with the adventurers representing first world society by comparison. In societies of that magnitude, the suggestion of simply taking care of someone's subsistence and allowing them to shape the world with their own creativity is even a consideration. The people of the land don't have any concept of personal freedom because they don't have the means by which to exercise it, nor the knowledge or power needed to actualize it. For now, this is all there is to consider on the matter. Just enough time is left in the episode to finally establish the situation from Toru and Minami's point of view. Again, we witnessed a trend of the show ending episodes with the setup for upcoming drama, and saving the downtime after the drama is over for the start of a new arc, lending beautifully to marathon viewing. We learn a lot all at once, not just that the kids are under the servitude of an asshole guild, but that they're not alone, that the people running things don't really know what they're doing well enough to even do it humanely, what they're working for, and how they got wrapped up in it. There's even a character beat with Toru where he notices Shiroi arriving back in Akihabara, but doesn't find the strength to call out to him. It's going to be brought up later when Toru has to face himself, but the real brilliance of this moment is how it ties the two stories together by showing us the party's arrival from another character's perspective, a really creative way to put a bow on this episode's complete story of the journey back to Akiba. Episode 6 opens with another ingenious information threading sequence. An expanded explanation of guilds and their ability to purchase guild halls dovetails into a sequence of Serada's return party in the Crescent Moon Alliance guild hall. I couldn't tell you who half of the characters in this scene are by name. Some of them only have a line or two of dialogue in the entire series, but the fact that all of them turn up consistently in different outfits throughout the show and look like fun characters that I'd want to eventually see jump in on the main story action keeps scenes like this endearing to return to. If you're the kind of viewer who mostly values scenes which directly progress the story or have clear ramifications for the characters, then you might find yourself bored with this episode. A lot of time is spent reintroducing the side cast, fleshing out the sense of community which is so integral to the Crescent Moon Guild's reputation, and reintroducing the party to Akihabara, which is settled into the ranks that were moving into place before we left. There is a lot of value in scenes like this which isn't immediately apparent, such as making us really understand why Serada would choose to stick with this guild instead of joining her friends in Log Horizon, why the members exhibit such loyalty and coordination while retaining a laid-back and friendly attitude. We may have had some sense of the Crescent Moon Alliance's general demeanor, but without even really drawing attention to it, the start of this episode teaches us a lot about them. Once we're done learning about Crescent Moon via experience, we are told about DDD through word of mouth. Back in the first part of this video, I talked about how the trajectory of the series followed an outward spiral of human interaction. We start with an individual, and that individual forms a family unit. This family unit has ties to an active community, which it will be involving itself with over the course of the next arc until it goes on to establish its own small community. The community the family is working with has to resolve a conflict involving all of the other communities in their city, and that's what we'll be dealing with up through episode 10. The problem in Akihabara is basically that everyone's got the wrong idea about how to best deal with their scenario. In the absence of any visible direction, the most powerful guilds have taken to just mimicking the way they enjoyed the game as best they can, but their perpetual grinding through all the good hunting grounds has exacerbated the disadvantages of smaller guilds, who can't come to an agreement about a strategy for how to collectively compete with the big ones. It's basically class warfare in a society which has yet to realize that they literally have no reason to be living this way, because the rules about how to be successful and happy in this society are entirely theirs to make up as they go, based on how they understand the mechanics. After the eye catch, Shiroi wanders alone and begins to recognize his place within the character arc I've been describing, and it's here that the importance of Shiroi's relationship with Kanami becomes apparent. Her voice appears in Shiroi's head, telling him that it's fine to spend time thinking, but since he's smart enough, why not solve the problem? I hinted before at the idea that Kanami represents the mad scientist to Shiroi's living computer and the archetype of the otaku hero's journey. And if you didn't go back and watch my No Game No Life or Steins Gate videos to figure out what the hell I was talking about, Kanami is a charismatic and boisterous persona whom, while clearly very intelligent and with a keen eye for talent and natural leadership ability, basically does whatever the hell she wants on the whim of her instinct without immediately evident reason, as we'll learn after meeting her in Season 2. Shiroi, on the other hand, is the type to hang back and simply analyze what's going on without necessarily doing anything about it. In combat, his usefulness is in relaying helpful information to other players which they can act on, while also performing his own spells at his own discretion. Later in Season 2, his growth as a person will lead him to develop closer communication with the other players, giving them authoritative commands with the confidence of their trust in him. This gap is bridged by his reverence for Kanami. At a time when he had just decided to reject other players entirely because they all wanted something out of him, he was drawn in by someone whose proposition was not to use his incredible talents for her sake, but instead just for the sake of drawing the most out of the experience of playing this game which any of them could possibly achieve. And it wasn't something they could do alone by design. Shiroi already knows that other people are worthwhile. He figured that out when he joined Debauchery Tea Party. We already saw him reach out to trusted companions immediately. We saw him being relied on, and we even saw him do something powerfully heroic which only he could have done as well as he did. But all of this is with the recognition that he could have done more, and he knew it at the time. There is no mathematical equation which a computer would struggle to solve like it would a moral one, because there is no inherent logic in morals. They have to be constructed from subjective judgments about yourself and the world around you. In fairness to Shiroi, he had no idea what the hell was going on when he came to this world, and no reason to believe that things would get so shitty for the twins. If I were in his shoes, I would be beating myself up over letting them stay in the presence of such shifty looking dudes when I already knew the situation was getting fucky, but I'd have to be reasonable enough to myself that it's not as if I wasted my time, and as long as I can do better from now on at recognizing my potential, I can view this as a learning experience. Problem solving in a complex situation is kind of like falling into a black hole. There's probably a million ways you could approach solving a complex problem, any of which you could logically justify as functional, but none of which is guaranteed when the possibility of unknown variables is so high. A mad scientist is someone who can reach into that void with the confidence that they're working from at least an elevated perch as compared to the other players in the game of life, and produce a solution that they're just crazy enough to barrel headlong into having realized. So long as they make any positive progress along the way, it won't have been for naught. As long as Shiroi can come up with a solid plan, leveraging the available knowledge that he's considered farther than anyone else has, and executing it to the full capacity he could imagine, there is a good chance that he'll be the best damn hand at the board right now. In order to pull off that execution, he's going to need a league of competent coordinators, a guild, which he doesn't have as of yet, and so becomes the flame lingering in his mind. That's when Nyanta turns up for one of the best dialogue scenes in the show. In his long years, Nyanta has concluded that it is meaningless to fear the failure state of an ambition, as inevitably all things will eventually reach it. Shiroi is afraid of making wrong decisions, of forming human connections which go rotten and die. Nyanta reminds him that they both still fondly carry the memories of the Debauchery Tea Party, a group which lived a beautiful era and then ended gracefully, and that the only way to experience this again is if someone continues trying to make it happen, even after they might have failed. Then, when Shiroi asks him what he should do, Nyanta drops this bombshell. The most spectacular thing you can do. You hold back too much. I don't think there's a human alive who isn't holding themselves back. The number of people stymieing their talents and potential for happiness, either through lack of belief in them or simply leaving them aside in the effort to sustain a living, is staggering. Shiroi is not just anyone, he is an immensely talented thinker. Mamare Tono is no doubt incredibly creative to have constructed these scenarios and possibilities, but he has the advantage of making everything up in such a way as to facilitate the story he wants to tell. In context, Shiroi is able to draw connections and find relevant information more capably than anyone else, and enough of that happens off-screen that we can just buy into it without the author having to justify it. Even though Nyanta is ostensibly just as powerful and experienced as Shiroi, just as he is older and wiser about certain aspects of life, he nonetheless defers to Shiroi as the person who is capable of doing something about this situation. Someone whom he is willing to follow around and be of use to for as long as it takes before that person figures out a plan for how to continue, because he trusts in that person's intelligence enough to believe that whatever they come up with is going to be the best possible plan. It is the display of unwavering trust from Nyanta and Naotsugu which, to frame it cynically, puts Shiroe's back against the wall. These powerful allies are already relying on him. It's too late to cry about not wanting to have to hold up to someone's expectations. Right now, the world itself is expecting something of you. Powerful forces are whispering your name to their right-hand men and actively considering the possibility that you are eventually going to reshape how they go about living in this world. Hesitating at this point is just going to make you look and feel weak. The only satisfying direction to move in is forward. Following this, Shiroe immediately sets to the things he should have done from the start. First, he contacts Minori in a heart-wrenching sequence of reassurance. This simple dialogue scene perhaps most powerfully conveys the kind of abusive, borderline hostage situation that the kids have found themselves in, just because of the way Minori has to use a system of coded cost to respond to Shiroe's questions. You can show us the poor treatment that they're living under and give us a good idea of what's going on from a lexical standpoint, but recognizing the sensation of having your basic right and ability to speak taken away, the frustration of having no mouth when you must scream and accidentally coughing too many times because you're trying to work through the tears, being so frustrated but then abated and reassured by the comfort of understanding, such clever and calculated understanding that it seems unstoppably powerful, a voice so confident in its conviction to save you that you will do whatever it says. It's no surprise that this girl develops a crush on this man. Right away, Shiroe comes to his most powerful allies, fresh off the heels of the huge favor he's done for them, to ask a crazy one in return. He lays it all out on the table, tells them how he really feels in a black pill carpet bomb, and drops the mic with his request for their assistance in raising 5 million gold and totally recontextualizing the entire culture of Akihabara. His approach is optimistic, humanist in how he believes everyone basically wants to live the happiest life they possibly can and just simply doesn't understand how to do it, even though his judgment of their current status is utterly venomous. This is a misanthropic power level reveal, Shiroe making clear where he stands on the line into sociopathy, with his understanding of how to manipulate people and willingness to do so to whatever extent stops short of infringing on agreeable morals. What Shiroe is proposing here is massive. Running the other guild out of town is one thing, but completely revolutionizing culture? How could someone simply engineer that? Well, in a world where no one is beholden to resource management or self-sustenance, the power of persuasion holds even more sway than it does for mere mortals. Rounding out the episode is a moment which can feel tremendously emotional when you truly know these characters. Shiroe's ability to secure the Crescent Moon leader's trust is couched in his symbolic act of starting a guild, of setting out to build his own family, and to cease turning his head from society. Marielle appreciates the meaning of this action so much that it brings her to tears, and me too, thanks to that damn music, and so just like Nyanta, she puts her faith in Shiroe. Enter, finally, episode 7, the one which I've been hyping for years. Its cold open explaining the minimum cost of living inside the game world is important for its implications. Technically, no one needs anything in this world. As far as we know, death has no consequences and starvation is impossible. So when Shiroe says that you need 35 gold a day to survive, he doesn't mean it literally. He means that it's the minimum amount which everyone is going to be driven to earn in the present system. Just because the rules of nature are different doesn't mean that people are no longer going to want to sleep with a roof over their head, or at least try to eat something. And since their property can be protected via the personal banking system, there's nothing else they particularly need or have conceived of seeking. Shiroe, meanwhile, has realized that there are better things to spend money on in this world, both on a micro and macro scale. Some things are priced so highly that a single player literally can't generate enough revenue to purchase them. And while Shiroe is the first to realize this, he is not the person most capable of acting on that realization once it's been had. There are much bigger and more organized guilds out there looking for purpose, and Shiroe can't be willing to wait for any of them to come up with their own ideas before he enacts his if he wants his idea to work. In other words, he's going to be holding his cards close to the chest, only letting those he trusts in on the mission to affect the lives of everyone else in the city without their consent. This is why Shiroe develops his reputation as the devil in glasses, because while everyone puts their trust in him as someone who can find the best way forward, they also know that he is willing to take authority into his own hands to whatever extent he thinks he can get away with. I would describe the bulk of episode 7 as following a single conceit from its smallest branch back to the root of its tree. That conceit is the invention of a hamburger. For starters, you need the ingredients, but Log Horizon is clever to never outright state the specific purpose of these ingredients. If you're rewatching the show, it's obvious, but there was no reason to think that they were making something so specific on an initial viewing. Instead, we learn about the mechanics of how monsters get converted into ingredient items, before a rapid-fire montage of people chopping wood, donning maid outfits, and crafting some kind of sauce. Again, it's like the episode is designed around slowly narrowing down the possibilities. First we knew they were making food, now we know they're making some kind of restaurant. Next, we learn of a preposterous amount of paperwork necessary to make this all possible. This isn't just a wacky plan the guild is concocting out of nowhere. There's a lot of research to be done and specific conditions to be met to execute this plan. And Crescent Moon has a massive leg up on their potential competition by launching into a market that potential competitors weren't even cognizant of, and would need considerable time to set up their own version of. A few minutes of intermittent character beats and setup later, and it's finally time for the true big come. The build-up is long and ridiculous and hilarious, and it doesn't pay off all in one fell swoop like last time. First, there's the shock of realization that good food is actually possible among the populace. Then there's the instant surge in demand from word-of-mouth spread, causing an epic line to form and supply to enter its second phase. First responders take their discovery straight to their guild leaders. Soon, all of the guild leaders are eating them. Merchants are struck by the low cost of the burgers and think they'll be able to muscle in on the market, not yet aware of the precautions which Shiroi and Henrietta have taken to prevent that. But the real wham moment comes when the head of another merchant guild, without hesitation, demands that his team investigate everything about how this was made possible, stating flatly while staring at his hamburger that this will change the world. This is the shit that I come to anime for, to stories for, period. Of course a hamburger can change the world. They already did. It's one of America's most highly proliferating cultural exports alongside soda, and the centerpiece of a massive chunk of the food industry, that being beef. The effect of burgers on the world have been tremendous, but that's also because they exist in the most universally appraised medium in existence. Food! Literally everyone needs it to survive, and so many of us develop a sort of fondness and respect for it over time. Burgers are one of the best tasting things that any average person is likely to encounter at some point in their life, almost definitely if they come from a first world society. A lot of people don't take burgers all that seriously because they are indeed cheap and easy, especially at lower levels. If you have a lot of experience with frozen patties and fast food, you might think of them as something you're ashamed at how much you eat. For sure, they aren't the healthiest food, but even bad burgers are better than most cheap food, and it doesn't cost more than $10 to get a really good one. And even if you make them at home with an actual recipe, you can easily turn around a satisfying dinner. It's such a versatile, accessible, satisfying, and universal food that it's an obvious choice for grabbing every single resident of Akihabara by the heartstrings. I've heard food described as a reason to live by many people throughout my life. Starbucks used as a means to stave off anxiety or mitigate stress. Comfort foods eaten as markers of personal success just as much as a filling meal. Personally, as a foodie, if you were going to motivate me to action, there was no greater promise than that of a great meal. One of my biggest motivations for maintaining a decent Patreon revenue is to keep my ability to eat out or prepare more esoteric meals at will, and I know I would have started busting my ass if I could have had a burger. The results of this are all as Shiroi expected, and from here there is nowhere to really expand for the Crescent Moon Alliance on their own, since they're already meeting the demand for their product to the best of their abilities, and their goal wasn't to run a business, it was to start a revolution. In order to take the next step, the other guilds are going to have to get involved. I won't defend the stupid scene of Henrietta chasing Akatsuki through the guild hall trying to inflict emotional damage on her, but the outfit she's forced into is undeniably precious. All eyes on the thigh pinch, who's with me? A few character beats and some more contact between Shiroi and Minori later, and Shiroi is giving Nyanta the scoop on the next big plan. He informs us that all of these random buildings around the town which were just background dressing in the original game are now available for purchase, as are all of the other buildings which did originally serve an in-game purpose. This is foreshadowing not only the foundation of the Log Horizon Guild Hall, but of course the major plot events of episode 10, which we'll be getting to in the next video. I've seen complaints that because of this scene, the purchasing of the Guild Hall was too predictable, but I don't think it was the director's intention to keep that twist a secret, especially when it literally cuts to the Guild Hall during the scene. After all, it's not really the fact that Shiroi ends up buying the guild hall that's impressive, but the way which he goes about it. But we'll get there eventually. Rounding out the episode is one more rejoinder in the chorus backing Shiroi's voice as he raises it in preparation to speak with the other guild leaders. Another of his former comrades in the debauchery tea party, one who had, without Shiroi realizing, felt spurned by his refusal to join the West Wind Brigade upon its founding. Shiroi instantly and authentically dispels this awkwardness by admitting to his prior inability to embrace the guild life, and, just as with Mariel before, uses the fact that he's formed a guild and is seeking to repair and rely on whatever connections he's made as a means of inspiring confidence in his friend. Seita is sold so hard that he flat out agrees to just do whatever Shiroi asks of him without stopping to hear the logic, since his trust in Shiroi's intelligence is absolute. It's only his character which requires monitor. And that's it for the episode that first endeared me to Log Horizon overall. Arguably, the best is yet to come, and even if it can't always top itself at every attempt to land a powerful punch, Log Horizon is always richer from the new ideas which are constantly added to it as it continues along. The show has a ton more to say, but at this point, the general ideology of the series and what exactly it's supposed to be about is a lot more clear than it was in the beginning. It's a show about building a society from the ground up in a world without inherent rules. We'll see how they start making that possible in part 4. If you can't stand the wait between these longer videos, be sure to subscribe to the I Am Games channel, where I've set out on quests both to analyze every game in the Tales of series and every game in the GameCube's library, among other things. I also stream on Twitch twice a week under that brand, and I carry this entire career on the back of my Patreon, so please head over there and indulge in the hundreds of hours of content which becomes available when you pledge even like $1. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.